Hello. Now we are going to look at multiplying and dividing integers. So how do we do multiplication and division when we are talking about numbers that could be negative or positive? What would that mean? So we're going to start off by reminding ourselves of what multiply and divide already mean when we just have positive whole numbers. So if I have 3 brackets 2, that means multiply. So the earlier way we might have written that would have been 3x2. Now, this isn't the way we want to write this going forward, but it means we have 3 groups of 2. So that's what 3 brackets 2 means. If the number is sitting next to a bracket, it means multiply. That means I have 3 of this group. So that would be 3 groups of 2 would give us a total of 6 units. What it fundamentally means is we have 3 of this, so to find out the total number, it'd be 2 plus 2 plus 2 would give us a total of 6 units. So that's what that means. We have 3 groups of 2. What does our division here mean? Well, we might have seen it written before as 8 divided by 2. So that's the notation we might have seen before. The way of writing we might have seen it before. We're going to tend to write division as fractions going forward. But what does it mean? It means how many of this group would fit in this group. How many 2's are there in 8? So how many 2's are there in 8? There are going to be 4 of them. We'd have 4 complete groups of 2 in 8 units. But if we look at this division, we have to be careful of something. Are we comparing like with like? Well, here we have 2 units and 8 units. So we're comparing like with like. How many groups of 2 units, 2 ones, are in 8 ones, 8 units? If we had something like this, where we have 4 brackets 6 divided by 8, this would mean we'd have 4 groups of 6, and we'd want to see how many 8 units fit in that. So we're not comparing like with like here. We have groups of 6 here and groups of 1 as our denominator. So we'd have to get everything as units compared to units. So 4 groups of 6 would be the same as 24 units, and then we'd be able to ask the question, how many 8 units, groups of 8, fit in a group of 24? And we know that the answer would be 3. But we need to compare like with like, units to units. So continuing, what does this sum here mean? Well, we know that the number sitting next to the bracket means multiply. So we have 3 groups of minus 2. So if we had 3 groups of 2, we'd just end up with 6. But this time we have 3 groups of negative 2. So what's that going to mean? It means that we have minus 2, minus 2, minus 2. So in total, we'd end up with minus 6 units. So our 3 by minus 2 ends up giving us minus 6 units in total. What does our sum here mean, where we have minus 3 brackets 2? Well, this means you're taking away 3 groups of 2. So 3 groups of 2 would be 6, and we're taking that away, so that ends up just being minus 6. Now, we can write that out more explicitly like we did here. We'd be able to say that that's taking away all of 2 plus 2 plus 2. So that ends up being the same as minus a group of 6, which is the same as minus 6. So that's where that is coming from. As we work through this, we have to try and read what does it actually mean when we're doing these sums. And once we understand how to read them, what it actually fundamentally means, then this becomes very easy. So we have to take our time and understand how to read what we are doing. Here we are at minus 7, and we minus 2. So we are taking away minus 2. What would that look like if we did it on our number line? So we start at minus 7. So we'd be down at minus 7 here. What would happen if we took away minus 2 away from our minus 7? So we had minus 7 units, and we removed negative 2. Well, this would be taking away 1 negative unit. We'd get rid of a negative unit and we'd end up at minus 6. If we got rid of a second negative unit, we'd end up at minus 5. So if we removed 2 units of negativity from minus 7, we'd end up at minus 5. But that looks a lot like we just added 2 to minus 7. So removing our negativity, removing 2 units of negativity, removing minus 2, ends up doing the same thing as adding 2. So that ends up being the same as minus 7 plus 2. Removing our negative ended up having the same effect as adding. And that's the fundamental thing we need to get into our heads. So once we have minus 7 plus 2, we can already see we end up at minus 5. So subtracting or removing a negative ends up having the same effect as adding. What happens if we were at minus 7 and we subtracted 2? Well, there we're still starting at minus 7. We're still starting at minus 7. But we are removing 2 units. So that means we would end up going more negative because we're removing more. We're going in the negative direction 2 spaces. So we'd end up down at minus 9. So this ends up being the same as just taking away 2 units. So minus 7 minus 2 means we're taking away 2 units. Well, we just write that down as minus 7 minus 2. I'm just taking away 2 units. And I end up down at minus 9. So how can we do this sum here? We are taking away 3 groups of minus 2. Well, we've seen taking away negatives ends up being the same thing as adding. So this ends up being the same as adding 3 groups of 2. So we would end up at plus 6. So that's how we can do our multiplication of positive and negative whole numbers, our integers. Now we're going to look at division, and before we do that we need to have a look at the factors of numbers because it's going to help us to understand how we can go from multiplication to some of our more complicated division. So what are the factor pairs of 10? Well, the factor pairs are the numbers that multiply together, the factors that multiply together to give 10, and we'd know that that would be 1 by 10 or 2 by 5. And that's all of them that we would have dealt with so far. But now we can see that if we take away a negative, if we had a minus times a minus, taking away a negative would also give us a positive. So we could also have taking away one group of minus 10 would also give us plus 10, and taking away 2 groups of minus 5 would also give us plus 10. So 10 could be written as 1 by 10, or 2 by 5, or minus 1 by minus 10, or minus 2 by minus 5. And we can use that to help us with our division. So what would 10 divided by 2 mean? Well, that means how many groups of 2 fit into a group of 10, and the answer there is just 5, as we would expect. So positive numbers, we don't have to do anything new. We've dealt with division of positive numbers before. What happens if we have minus 3 divided into minus 6, or minus 6 divided by minus 3? Well, this is saying how many minus 3s, how many groups of minus 3 would fit in minus 6. It might be helpful to have a look at that on our picture. So if we were at minus 6, so we have a group of minus 6 units, and how many groups of minus 3 would fit into that group? Well, we would have 1 group and 2 groups. So that would be a group of minus 3 units. That's another group of minus 3 units. So we have 2 complete groups of minus 3 fit in minus 6. So we just end up with 2 of them. So that's all our division is meaning, and that hasn't changed. We have to think more carefully about it because we have more complicated groups. But here we're comparing like with like we need to with our division. We have minus 3 units, and how many of them would there be in a group of minus 6 units? And there'd just be 2 complete groups. So the answer is just 2. Here we have minus 12 divided by 4. Now, how many 4s would there be in minus 12? Here we run into a problem because we're not comparing like with like. We have a negative number here and we want to know how many positive numbers go into it. Now that doesn't make immediate sense. So what we have to do is say, can we write minus 12 in terms of a positive number? So we can say how many 4s would fit into our positive number. And this is where our factor pairs can help us. Minus 12 is the same as minus 1 multiplied by 12. If we factorized minus 12, we'd be able to say it's the same as minus 1 times 12, and that's still divided by 4. So now we can break up our question and say we have how many 4s would fit into 12, and it would be 3. So we have minus 1 groups of 3 is minus 3. So if we have 4 divided into minus 12, we say that's the same as having minus 1 groups of 4 divided into plus 12. And we end up with minus 3 as our answer. What happens if we have 14 divided by minus 7? Again, we're not comparing like with like, but I could say my 14 here is the same as minus 1 times 14, all divided by, by minus 14, all divided by minus 7. So how many minus 7s fit into minus 14? Well, 2 of them would. If I'm all the way down at minus 14, how many minus 7s would fit in that group? Well, I'd have 1 minus 7 here, and another minus 7 would bring me here. So 2 of them would fit into that group. So I can say that that's the same as minus 1 groups of 2. So I'd end up with minus 2. So long as I compare like with like, I can do my division. Now I have some more steps to my multiply. I have minus 3 groups of 5 times minus 2. So if I'm taking away 3 groups of 5, that would be the same as taking away 15 units in total. So I'd be able to say that's the same as minus 15 on minus 2. And now, removing 15 groups of minus 2 would be the same as adding 15 groups of 2. Removing negativity is the same as adding, and 15 groups of 2 would be 30 units in total. Here I have minus 6 groups of 8. So I would end, and I'm dividing that by 12. I need to compare like with like, so I need to get this division the way I need it. So I have minus 6 groups of 8 would give me a total of minus 48, still all divided by 12. Here I'm not comparing like with like, so I need to find out my positive number here. That's the same as minus 1 times 48, all divided by 12. How many 12s are there in my 48 units? There would be 4 of them. So I'd have minus 1 groups. 4 is minus 4. And here I have 18 divided by minus 3 by 6. So taking away 3 groups of 6. So I'd end up with 18 divided by minus 18. And here I need to compare like with like. So I'd end up with minus 1 times minus 18 all over minus 18. How many minus 18s fit in minus 18? Well, one of them does. Anything divided by itself can only fit in one time. So I'm taking away 1 group of 1. It's the same as minus 1. So that is how we can, by comparing like with like and thinking about our factorizing and the meaning of our multiplication, we are able to multiply and divide integers. It is very important that we take the time to be able to tell ourselves the story of this, to read what these things mean. Once we are able to read the meaning of them, these questions are very straightforward. But until we understand the meaning of them, they'll continue to confuse us. And that is what we need for now.